Hi, I'm Brent Ackers with Cantek, and in today's video, I'm going to guide you through some of the setup and maintenance on our Cantek MX370P Edgebander. So first off, I'm going to guide you through some of the key features of this machine, starting with the pre-mill unit. Then we've got our quick change glue pot, our guillotine, our 2 pressure rollers, we've got our end trim unit, we've got our top and bottom cutting unit, we've got our corner rounding unit, we've got our radius scraping unit. Last up, we have the buffing unit here. Before we get started on the setup and maintenance of this machine, I want to discuss a little bit about the pre-installation requirements and how important it is. If we get the pre-installation requirements correct, then we know we're going to get a good product. Okay, some of the things that we want to think about prior to getting our machine and when our machine arrives is 3 basic things: your power, the air, and the dust collection that's going to the machine. Most of these machines are 230 volt 3-phase or 230 volt single phase. For the 3-phase machines, you've got your 3 phases coming to the machine and the ground. When your electrician makes these connections, they want to make sure that their power requirements are within plus and minus 5%. So for 230 volt, you're somewhere in the world of 219 and 241 volts. The reason for that is these machines, they're a little bit more complex. They've got control power, and they're a little bit more sensitive to voltage other than a basic conventional machine. Moving on to the air, we can walk around to the other side of the machine. And the key in regards to your air is making sure that you've got a good volume of air going to the machine and that it's clean and dry. So you want to connect your air line to the machine. You want to adjust it so that you have between 6 and 7 bars of air pressure and that it's good clean air. The other thing is that there is an oil trap in here, and you can just use regular air tool oil for that and ensure that it's kept full. Moving on, as far as dust collection is incredibly important because it keeps your machine clean. If you don't have enough draw or CFM pulling the chips away, pulling the debris away, then it can end up in your glue pot or in other areas building up and cause all kinds of issues. This machine, it's got 3 5-inch ports, so it would require about 1800 CFM. So yeah, you just want to check with your dust collector and make sure that you've got enough capacity there. And if you cover those 3 things, you're off to a good start. So first thing we're going to dive right into are the controls. So if you follow me over here. On this particular machine, we've got all manual controls, so all manual push buttons. So to the left here, you can see that our glue pot is heating up. So this is our temperature control. So depending on what glue you're going to run, you're going to adjust the maximum temperature. And then as we move on here, we've got our pre-mill, we've got our guillotine on, we've got our conveyor, feed conveyor, we got our trim units, our corner rounding, our preheated fence, and our buffing wheels. This red light here, this will let you know once the glue pot has gone into standby. If you've walked away from the machine and you're multitasking, you're doing other things, then this light will light up here. And then you've got your emergency stop. The last thing to point out here is you've got a green indicator light, and what this does is once you've put your first piece in, it'll tell you once it's ready to accept the second piece here. So that it'll light up, and it's more or less a ready light. And that's it. So we're going to go through the steps in adjusting the feed beam height. First thing you want to do is take your calipers and mic the thickness of it. So we're about 18.4. So we then want to come to our adjustment and turn the crank handle to 18.4. And then we want to test to see how tight it is. So we just want to turn on our conveyor, run a piece of material, and we can stop the conveyor. Just grab your material back and forth and just make sure you're not getting any movement. So next thing we're going to do is make the adjustment on our Outrigger support. We're going to need a 10mm Allen, something to create some leverage with, whether it's a stick or a screwdriver, and 2 panels. First thing we're going to do is take those 2 panels, we're going to open up the feed beam, and we're going to place them on where you're going to make the adjustments. And one over here. Then you want to close up your feed beam to your desired thickness, which on this one is 18.4. From here, you've got your 10mm bolt. So you want to put your Allen wrench in there to tighten it down and then create some leverage. And you're actually just going to pull up on it, and just so you're just touching off on the panel and tighten it down. And then you're going to repeat that on the other side. So on our pre-mill unit, one of the things you're going to need to be able to gain access to is the cutter heads. So in order to do that, you're going to have to remove 2 guards here. The first one being the one in the back here. You can just grab a Phillips driver or a 10mm socket, depending on how tight they are. So we're just going to loosen those off. It's really important to keep organized. So have a bench where you can put all your hardware. Next up is the safety guard around the cutter heads. What you're going to need is a 5mm Allen to be able to reach that. You can do it with an Allen key with a ball end on it, but I like to do it with an extension. It's just a lot easier to get in there. So we'll remove the one on the left. There's just 2 bolts in there. Once we get it loosened, we can spin it right out. The other thing I suggest you get is a magnet to be able to pull the hardware out. It's a lot easier to retrieve the hardware. So we got our hardware there and our washer. Now we can do the right side. Again, we can retrieve it with the magnet. If you get lucky, you'll get it all at once. And at this point, you can carefully remove the guard. You want to be really careful that you're not hitting the carbide on the cutter heads as you're pulling it out. So nice and gentle. And you can just put that guard aside. So here you are. Now you have access to both your left and right cutter heads. The only the way that you pull these off is that you're going to need an 8mm Allen, and you're just going to break this bolt and pull it out. So we're going to switch over to an 8mm. The other thing we have to do is we've got to lock these heads up. So you're going to have a tool that comes with the machine like this, and there's just holes at the bottom of the shaft here, and you just want to slide that in there, and that stops the cutter heads from turning. So at this point, we can now loosen off the bolt. The washer comes off with it. And then your cutter head slides right out. So at this point, we can just check the condition of it. If it needs to be replaced, we can do that, and then just get them reinstalled. For whatever reason, if you need to adjust the top and bottom height of the cutter heads, you would actually come down here. You're going to loosen off these pinch bolts, and you have your adjustments on the left and right side here. And then you're just going to put everything back on in reverse, and you're all set. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is install our tape. We're going to drop it on our tape tray, and we're going to feed the tape through the machine here. And you've got two height adjustments. So you've got your first one right here. You just want to release your kip handle and bring it down just so it touches off. And then you want to continue to feed in, and you've got your other height adjustment right here. So this one will move up and down. And again, you just want to just touch off on the top and continue to feed your material so that it just sits there. The next thing you want to do is adjust your pressure rollers. So depending on if you're running 0.5 or 1 millimeter, you're going to take that tape and you're going to insert it right here where these two dials are. And you're just going to tighten these down until you get some light pressure on them. And that's going to give you your pressure. So next up, we just want to talk about some of the basic adjustments on the glue pot. First up, we can talk about the spring-loaded pressure for the glue roller. That's where the adjustment is. That adjustment's made right here. You can take a 13 millimeter wrench and you can actually tighten or loosen this to either increase or reduce the amount of spring pressure. What we're looking for is about 1 millimeter. You can actually pull this back and check the sort of gap on that. When you're actually running material through the machine, you're actually going to see that 1 millimeter gap as well. So that's a good place to double check. And then moving up, we can talk a little bit about the glue gate. This is where you increase or reduce the amount of glue flow. So as you go clockwise, you're going to reduce the amount of glue flow, or counterclockwise, you can increase the glue flow. And you can run some test samples and check that and make some adjustments as need be. The other thing we want to be careful of is just making sure that we don't, the level for our glue pot, the amount of glue that we have in there is sort of in between that 1 to 1.5 inches between the top of the glue and to the top of the glue pot. So making sure that it doesn't get above that. Yeah, if you get above that and as it warms up and expands, it could overflow. So in order to determine whether you've got enough glue when adjusting the glue gate, you want to look for two things. You want to look for just the slightest amount of glue coming out in between the tape and the panel. There's going to be just the slightest amount. The other thing you want to do is you can just pull off the tape and we can look for coverage. Just wanting to make sure that you're getting good glue coverage across the whole edge of the panel. If you're not, then you want to increase the glue. So next up, we're going to talk about the process of removing the quick change glue pot. Real simple. You want to get the tape out of the way first, so you can draw that back. Then you can just pull the top lid off the glue pot, put that aside. Then we want to remove this red cover. You're going to need a 4 millimeter Allen key. I'm just going to loosen that off. Pull that aside. Then we can disconnect the cable. You just push down on these connections and pull up. Then you're going to need a 5mm Allen to be able to remove this top guide plate. It's just 2 bolts. Just going to loosen them off. This one's in a little bit of a tighter spot, so sometimes you'll need a wrench in there just to crack it. At that point, it's ready to be pulled out. You can put that aside. Then we want to get down below here, and we're going to remove the tension from the chain that drives the glue spindle. So there's a kip handle here that you just want to loosen off. Then there's another handle here you want to pull towards yourself to remove the tension, and then you can remove the chain. Next up, there's a pinch bolt over here that needs to be loosened, and then we can pull the glue pot out. So we want to loosen that off. And we're just going to grab our cable and then pull up vertically to remove the glue pot. And it's that simple. So to put the glue pot back in, we're going to do everything again in reversed. So we'll go ahead and show you that as well. Again, you're going to take your glue pot and you're going to drop it down in place. Now there's a pin down below here that'll help you locate its position. And then we want to tighten up the pinch bolt. And then put the chain back on to the sprocket and then tension it up. Then we can lock it down. From here you can just go ahead and put your cable back on so it's out of the way. And then we got our top guide rail. We can put that back in. We're going to tighten that up again with a 5mm Allen wrench. And you can put your lid back on and your protective cover. And then you're good to go. You're just going to put your tape back into position and you're ready to run. So as we move past the pressure rollers, we're going to move on to the end trimming unit. First thing we like to do is get the copy pads adjusted. For this demonstration, we're actually going to remove the dust hood so that we can get just better access to it. But typically you can adjust these copy pads without removing this. So first thing, we're going to remove the flex hose. And then we're going to remove these 3 bolts here. And that's going to pull the dust hood right off. So the other benefit of pulling this off is I can show you how to remove the end trimming blades as well when it comes time to maintain them. So now you can see we've got access to the copy pad and the end trimming blades. So we'll talk a little bit about the copy pad first. Right in the middle, you've got a set screw right here, and that's a locking set screw. So you want to back that right off. And then if you need to be able to trim more off or less, then you're going to adjust these 2 top and bottom bolts here. They're actually spring loaded, and as you move them in and out, they're going to either take more material off or less material. And then every time you make an adjustment, you're going to run a test piece and see what your result looks like. If you need to take more off, then you're gonna sort of bring it in and trim it up. Once you've completed that, make sure everything's locked down and you're good to go. Moving on to checking and maintaining your blades here. Ever so often you're going to check in there, just making sure that they're not dull or any material hasn't built up in here. And to be able to remove these, you need a 22 millimeter wrench on this end and an Allen key on the other end. So we're going to shift the unit across. On this end, on the fan side of the motor, you're going to stick your Allen key in there to be able to lock the spindle down, and then you can move it back. This nut here, it's a reverse thread nut, so make sure you're going into the right direction. So we can get that on there and unlock it and spin it off. Again, remember this is a reverse thread. You take the nut off, the washer, and then you can get access to your blade pack there. Just make sure when you put them back on, that obviously they're moving in the correct direction. One thing to note on the end trimming unit is that when the cylinder reaches the top here, you have these sensors on the top and the bottom that read the position of the cylinder. Sometimes this sensor can actually get bumped out of position, or it can be moved for whatever reason. We'll sort of exaggerate that. We'll just move it out of the way. And as the unit comes up to the top, the LED goes out. You have to make sure that this read sensor is in the correct position. Otherwise, what you might experience is the end trimming unit to the blades might go right through and cut through the edge of your panel. So if you ever see that, just double check the read sensor at the top of the cylinder. Make sure it's in the correct position. So we'll move this one back up. And you can see here, once we move it to the top position, the LED now turns back on. Okay, next up, we're going to just talk about some of the basic functions and setup for the top and bottom trimming. The first thing we want to talk about is the adjustment for the type of tape that you're going to be running, or the size of tape. So whether you're going to be running 0.5 or 1 mil or 2 mil, you're going to want to be able to make that adjustment on these mechanical counters over here. So right now you can see we're set up at 0.5. So if I wanted to run the 1 millimeter, then we can make that adjustment by moving it to 1 mil. So the next thing we want to look at is getting it dialed in so that this is absolutely flush with the panel. So for instance, if we had some 1 millimeter, and if it was a little bit proud, if it was sticking out a little bit, then we can sort of adjust that so we can get it nice and flush. So the adjustment for the bottom and the top are completely the same. They're just flipped upside down. So this adjustment's on the top, and then this adjustment is on the bottom. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to release these jam nuts. These are these nylock nuts. You need a 10 millimeter wrench, and you just want to loosen those off. And we can loosen this one off as well. And that'll give you enough movement that you can sort of make that micro adjustment, whether you're taking more off or you're adding some. If it's getting too close to the panel, then you can move it into the positive direction. So once we have that sorted out, we can actually look at replacing the inserts on the head. So first thing we want to do is just remove the dust collection and get that out of the way. Then we can take a 6 millimeter Allen wrench and loosen off this top bolt. So this top bolt is actually what carries the whole motor. So once you release this, it'll drop out of the way. So you want to be careful and hold on to it. So you can pull this bolt out of the way. And then this whole head will just drop out of the way. And you'll see here, you've got 4 inserts, and you can either take the time to inspect them, make sure that they're sharp, they're not chipped, and if they need to be replaced, then you can just take your 3mm wrench and loosen them off and replace them and retorque them down. Putting the head back in, it's really quite simple. You just place it back into the groove. What's really important is that this bolt is used as a stop against this surface. You got to make sure that that's nice and tight, because that's what the 0 point is. So once that's tight, you just insert the bolt and tighten everything back down again. The only other adjustment we need to talk about is if you need to get these cutters out of the way for whatever reason, if you don't want to do any top and bottom trimming, we can actually pull these heads up. They're on a pivot. We can pull them up right out of the way, and we can actually just move this stop over, and it pulls them out of the way. And the same thing with the bottom head as well. It moves on a pivot. And then you just got to remember, when you want to activate them again, you just put it back to the 0 point. That's about it. Okay, moving on to the corner rounding unit. So when we get around to setting this machine up for 1mm, 2mm, 3mm, the one thing that we want to do is we want to get it set up so that we're rounding off this corner here. So the first adjustment to be made is your horizontal adjustment. One thing we have to do here is make sure that we unlock this kip handle here, and then we can adjust this. So if we're going to run to 2mm, we can crank it up to 2mm, or if we're bringing it back to 1mm, we can go to 1mm. I like to go a little bit further and then pick up the backlash, and then you're ready to go. The next thing we can do is I'll show you how to remove this cutting unit. There's 2 things that can be done. We can check on the condition of the cutter, and we can check on the condition of the retaining guide. So we'll grab an Allen key. We need to remove these 2 bolts here. Now, once we've removed these 2 bolts, this will allow us to swing this unit out of the way. And again, really important that we make sure that this is unlocked, and then this will allow us just to slide the unit right out. And you can disconnect the wire. It's got a quick connect on it. And then we can start working on removing the retaining guide and the cutter. So the 2 things we want to look at here is there's a retaining guide on here that can wear out over time. There's actually an extra one that comes with the machine. That is released just by a C-clip here, which will go through that process. And then we're also going to want to be able to inspect and replace, if need be, our cutter. So the first thing we'll do is remove the cutter. You're going to need a 17mm open face wrench. We'll put that on the shaft, and a 17mm socket for the end. So once we unlock that, we can pull the nut off the end, and this whole unit will just slide right out. So in here, there's also a washer. Just make sure that when you put this back in, that you put the washer that's seated back in, and you can slide the unit back on. So we'll go ahead and tighten this back up, and then I'll show you how to remove the retaining guide. So again, you need to remove the C-clip here. We can pop that off. Then we have a spring washer here. It can be a little bit tricky to get out, so you can just take a flathead screwdriver and really lightly sort of work it off. There it comes. And then at this point, again, there's another washer, and you can replace your retaining guide. That's it. So when you're putting this unit back in, a couple things to pay attention to. We have a brass guide in the bottom here, and sometimes when you're pulling it out, you can get out of position. So we really want to make sure that we tip this down so that when we bring the unit in, that it just glides in really easily. The other thing we want to pay attention to is this guide here, and we want to make sure it's in the horizontal position and not the vertical position. If it's in the vertical position, it'll contact this block down here, and you won't get it into the right position. So let's connect the wire again. And then we're gonna slide the unit back in. Just take your time on this, and sometimes you gotta sort of wiggle it back and forth a little bit. There we go. At this point, we can put our bolts back in. We'll tighten those up. And then we can go back down and tighten the unit up. You're good to go. Okay, so as we move along, now we're at the radius scrapers. So just like the top and bottom cutters, you've got a top unit and a bottom unit. So first thing I like to do is, let's get these flex hoses out of the way for the dust collection. So what we can do is we can talk a little bit about getting the cutter adjusted. In this corner here, once we remove this dust hood, it'll expose the carbide insert that will actually do the radius scrape. So on this, you've got a horizontal movement, and you've also got a vertical movement. So to be able to adjust these, you have to unlock that particular axis. So on the horizontal one, you've got these two locking nuts here. So we can go ahead and loosen those off. And this will allow you, if you're going to go, right now it's set up for 1 millimeter, and if you want to adjust that to 2 mil, to do a 2 mil radius, then you're going to move it to there, run a test run, and then you can sort of make your micro adjustments. If you need to make any vertical movements, you can take your 13 millimeter wrench, and we can unlock that axis, and then you can take your mechanical adjustment on this end. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to gain access, like I said, to the carbide insert. So we're going to pull this dust hood off. There's just 2 bolts inside of here. You can use a Phillips driver or a 10 millimeter socket. Typically, If the bolt is a little too tight, you might want to put a socket on it. So once we got that exposed, you'll see in the corner here, we've got our carbide insert. This is a two-sided insert, so once that insert gets dull, then we can get in there and we can flip it around and use the other side. So I will just get my Allen wrench in here and we can pull it out and take a look. So you can see here, it's a two-sided insert. You just want to make sure when you put it back in that the sharp side is facing out. One thing to note is if you're doing 0.5 or if you're doing any testing, you need to be able to disable or move the cutter away from the material. Very easy to do. Everything's spring loaded, so you can just pull back on the unit and adjust this stop. And then you can do the same thing on the bottom here, and you can push it away and adjust the stop. So moving on to adjusting the buffing unit, all you're going to need is a 13mm wrench. You've got 2 bolts for the top and 2 bolts for the bottom. You just have to loosen off these bolts and then get the buffing wheel adjusted so it's just touching the corner of the panel. So you can see here, once you loosen it off, it'll pivot. And we want to just get that so it's just touching the edge. And then we're going to tighten that up. And you're going to do the same to the bottom, and you're done. So last but not least, we want to talk about maintenance on the MX370P. On any Edgebander, maintenance is absolutely critical. Keep making sure that the machine on a daily basis is kept clean. The most important area in any Edgebander is the area where you have your glue pot. You want to make sure that you're not blowing air into the glue pot. You want to make sure that your pressure rollers are kept nice and clean, that there's no glue buildup on them. And as you go through on a daily basis, you know, a couple times a day during your lunch break or at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you take compressed air and start blowing all the debris away from this unit. Next up, we're just going to talk about some of the weekly maintenance. Down here, we've got our air filter regulator. While we've got air still supplied to the air filter regulator, I'll show you here. This is where the water trap is. So if you do have any water in your lines, it should trap it into this cup, and you can just hit this button at the bottom here and it'll blow the water out. If you are noticing that you have water in your lines, you want to really make sure that you've got an air dryer in line with your compressor. The other thing to note on these is that there is an oil cup, and this will give a little bit of air tool oil throughout the lines to keep everything lubricated. You want to make sure that that is kept sort of between the 20 and 80% mark. So moving on, we're just going to come around the track side of the machine. Right here we've got our conveyor belt, and we want to check the tension on this periodically. So you're going to lift up on it, and if you got quite a bit of tension with just a few fingers, about a ½ an inch of tension, then you've got, you know, pretty good tension on it. If it's any more than that, then you really want to take a look at the tension on it, you can make that adjustment on the end of the machine here. So you've got 2 points of adjustment on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So there's a jam nut on the back side of these. You can loosen it off and then set your tension. So moving on to the front of the machine. So some of the other areas we want to pay attention to are on these linear guides. We want to apply just a thin layer of grease on the top and the bottom of each one of these rails. So you've got 2 on the horizontal, and then you've got your vertical rail on the back side here. And then when you do that, you want to be able to just move the unit back and forth and be able to get the other side as well. Again, just a real thin layer of grease on there. And then moving over to your end trimming unit, you've got your guide rails. You've got 2 on your horizontal plane, and you've got 2 on the back side on your vertical plane. Same sort of thing, but instead of your general grease, you're going to just use air tool oil. So you're just going to put a couple drops on the rails and then move it back and forth to sort of work it in. Same thing on the vertical. Just going to move it up and down. The air tool oil, I've got some laying around here. I'll show you after. But the grease that you're going to use for this machine is just a general grease. You're gonna want 2 grease guns set up. So you're going to want 1 grease gun for your high temp grease and 1 grease for just the general EP2 grease. You know, outside of your rails, you've got a couple other grease points for the track that we just talked about the tension on. One of the grease points is on the inside here. You'll see this red marker pointing towards it. So about once a month, you want to give that a couple shots of grease. And we're going to move around to the other side here, and I'll show you where the other one is. So we've got another one, another Zerk fitting here. Again, just general grease, nothing special, nothing brand specific, just a general EP2 grease. The other grease that we can talk about is our high temperature grease. This is something that we do sell, but you can really get it anywhere. Again, it's not brand specific. There is a grease gun that comes with the machine, so you can pack it full of high temp grease. And what you want to do is just give it 1 shot of grease every 2 to 3 months. And what you've got here is you've got your Zerk fitting. I've got this yellow marker sort of pointing towards it, and you've got your Zerk fitting there. And what that does is it greases the glue spindle in there, and it's really important to make sure you've got high temperature grease for that. So one other thing we really want to talk about, and we're going to do a big deep dive into it, is the glue pot. So a lot of the times, you know, debris will get caught up in the glue roller, or, you know, the lid will be kept off of the glue pot and debris will get in there. And what happens is the auger is going to sort of draw it back in behind the glue roller, and you're not going to get an even application of glue. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the glue temperature up to about 190, and then I'm going to show you how to break down this whole glue tower and get everything cleaned out. So one of the most important parts of this machine is keeping the glue pot clean and keeping the glue roller clean. If you don't keep it clean, you're not going to get a good application of glue, and it's gonna hurt your product. So what we've got here is our temperature is almost reached 190, and we're gonna move over to the glue pot here. So we've got our temperature where we need it to be. And the first thing we're gonna do is pull the glue out of the glue pot. So we're gonna take our lid off here. What I've done is I've taken just a couple strips of wood And you know, it helps to have a little bit of a taper on them, but just throw a couple sticks of wood in here. What you're going to do is you're just going to actually just put them right into the glue. And you're just going to let that settle. And what we're going to do is when we come in tomorrow morning, we're going to heat the machine up to about 150 degrees. And then at that 150 degree point, we're going to be able to pull these sticks, and the majority of the glue is going to come with them. So we'll see you then. So now that we've let the glue pot cool off, we're at that stage where we can start warming it up again to be able to pull the glue out. So you want to get it to about 75 to 90 degrees. So if you sort of come in here, and what's going to happen is we're going to just, it's going to heat up the outside edges first. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab onto the sticks. And if we pull up, it should pull out the majority of the glue. And we can just take a box, cardboard box, or some rags and get rid of it. And then this gets us into the position where we can grab some little trims, some little sticks and stuff like this, and just start scraping out the majority that's left behind. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the temperature to get up to around 150 degrees. And we're going to start disassembling the tower and pulling the tower out so that we can clean in behind the glue roller and clean out the rest of the pot. So now that we've reached 150 degrees, what we're going to start doing is disassembling our tower here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out this temperature probe. One thing I'll mention is you want to wear some gloves. This is quite warm, so something like a welder's gloves or an insulated glove that's going to protect your hands. But first thing you want to do is pull out this temperature probe. You can get this out of the way, and you can take this bolt off here. And again, just pull it out of the way over here. Next thing is we've got 1, 2, and 3 bolts that we've got to remove to be able to pull the tower out. What I like doing is once it's up to temperature, we can actually now disconnect the harness down here. You'll see down here there's a quick disconnect, and you can actually disconnect that and move out of the way. What that'll do, it'll allow us just to remove the heat and make sure that the glue roller doesn't turn on. And I always like to use my magnet to ensure I don't lose any hardware. So as I'm pulling this out, I can make sure it doesn't drop in the glue pot. We've got 2 more. We've got 1 in the back here. If it's tight, you can use a wrench to give yourself some leverage to be able to crack the bolt. And you can pull it right out. We got the last one. So we put the hardware aside. And what you want to do is, if you've got a bench, you want to get that nice and close by. Because when we pull this tower out, it's going to come with some glue. We've got some extra cardboard to sort of protect the surfaces. And at this point, it should come right out. So you can grab onto it. If you had a rag, you can sort of help you. It just comes straight up and out. I like to take a piece of cardboard and just scoop it up underneath. And at this point, you're going to have access, if you zoom in on here, you're going to have access to be able to take, again, your wood scrapers, and you can clean out any of the glue and get everything. If you have any burnt glue or anything like that, you just want to clean it off. One thing to note is that these glue pots have a Teflon coating on the inside, so you cannot use any sort of metal or anything that'll scratch the Teflon coating. The Teflon coating really makes it easy to be able to sort of scrape that excess glue out of there and get it all cleaned up. From there, once you've got it all cleaned up, you just reassemble it and you're good to go.